So Brenda, you and I both kind of have design background. We're talking about UX design in relation to community today. So we're going to start off with what role you see design playing in the success of an online community.
Yeah, so I think first impressions are everything. So you obviously want to use like design to reflect through visuals, through imagery, the purpose and the identity of your community. It is also important to think of your brand guidelines. How can you translate those into that online community space in order to create like a sense of familiarity for your users? So especially if they're already used to your brand in other places, if they're migrating from one platform to the next one, it is really through design and that consistency that you can make them feel at home. And I think yeah, you wanted to add something? Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say that design consistency, I feel like it also evokes like a sense of trust. If your website looks a certain way, your emails look a certain way, that consistently also lets people know they're in the right place. It's kind of the brand they're used to, and they can feel comfortable joining and contributing to the community.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. That consistency is really key to make them feel safe, to make them feel at home. And I think like another aspect, and we're gonna focus a bit on that on the three community mistakes design wise. But design is not just about how things look, but it's also about how can you create the specific user journey to best guide your users through that experience of joining the community. Through that experience of them introducing themselves to the community, etc. So I think that's kind of like what we're gonna dig into three most common design mistakes.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that because I think it's a common misconception that if something looks really great, it's automatically successful. There's a lot more behind it when you're considering UX and UI design for sure. So that kind of segues into our next topic. Some of the common UX challenges that you see people face all the time when they're building an online community. And community is a little bit different than traditional like website design, UI and UX. So it seems like there's some unique challenges that people face there.
Totally. So it's always, as I said, to not just worry about the look and feel. That's important. But let's say that's kind of like the first step. And then we need to think of like striking that right balance between content and aesthetics, and basically at which point in the journey does the user need which content. Sometimes we tend to overload directly like our public office homepage or our landing page, and then the user is kind of like lost and overwhelmed. So a community, as you said, is different to a website. It's also like a space that the user is going to visit different times. So we need to think of the first time experience, of the returning experience, etc., and really narrow down what's like the key action that's the most important at that moment, and think of the attention span of the user when he comes back to the community. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So kind of putting your clear purpose and value proposition front and center so that people understand what they're looking for. You're kind of guiding the user on the journey. This is what we want you to kind of get out of it for the first time you're joining. And then as you kind of return to the community, this is what we want to serve you up, like first and foremost, making sure there's that sort of user journey or sort of hierarchy in terms of order of importance of the elements that you're guiding them through.
Exactly. So it's funny because I just noticed today when we were reviewing the slides that the three mistakes that we kind of like picked are tying into this user journey experience. So when we say the lack of clear purpose or value proposition, we're thinking of the user that still is not part of your community. So perhaps they find you through an invite, they find you through a Google search, and they come to your landing page where you're basically the most important is to make super clear your value proposition, keep it short, break the layout into sections, perhaps use icons or visuals to accompany like the textual information, and to really make it clear what are the benefits for them. In this example that we see here, we can see that it's really overwhelming. It has like a lot of information, including perhaps like some information of the founding members, partners, etc. So it's not really making it easy for me to kind of like take the leap and decide to join that community. Up next, we have like another example of kind of like the things that we would recommend. So basically like clearly highlighting the community's missions and the benefits. As you can see in here, there's also some imagery being used. So we're breaking kind of like that information into different sections, into a layout that is a bit more, yeah, like reflecting like who is already part of this community, and then super clear telling to the member what are you gonna get when you get access to this community. One more thing I will say is if you have the chance, not everyone does, but if you have the chance to kind of like tease some content of what's inside the community, so it could be events, it could also be like news, that's also like a great way to kind of like get people interested in joining the community. And last but not least, always remember to put clear CTAs to request to join, to log in. You can do this at the top of the page, and then it doesn't hurt to kind of like repeat it at the bottom of the page to really kind of like push the user to that key action, which is requesting them to join your community.
Yeah, I think one of the themes throughout this section of like the pain points that you guys face a lot is that communities, oftentimes we see people who are so excited about all of the different information and collateral and different components of their community. They want to kind of put everything front and center. And this is why we feel it's so important for your community managers, your stakeholders running your community to really connect with UX experts to help sort of distill, okay, and break down. Yes, we have 20 things that we're really excited about, but if we put all that 20 things first, nothing is sort of the hierarchy isn't there. We're not kind of guiding people in a really clear, definitive fashion. So kind of the expertise that Brenda and team bring to the table is really helping you kind of break down what's most important and how to kind of create an effective user journey. Simplify, simplify, simplify at the end of the day.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean, that's a great example, Ali. It doesn't mean that other information is not going to be anywhere. Like we're not going to delete it, but it's just like kind of like working on that hierarchy. I mean, really strict, like, does that need to be in this homepage? Or can we create another tab or a link to kind of like a detail page? If someone is really interested on the partners or on the founders, then they can still find that information. But perhaps it doesn't need to be at that level one. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I think if we're good, we can move on to kind of number two, mistake number two, which you started to touch on there, overly complex navigation in terms of like the top nav in your community.
Yeah, exactly. So if we look again through the user flow, so we imagine the mistake one, I'm still kind of thinking, should I join the community or not? What happens when I actually join the community? I land inside the community, and sometimes we see a lot of our clients, they have a lot of tabs on their main navigation, like the example here under. So this is a bit frustrating for the end user. They have just arrived. They want to know where should I go? Are there some key actions that I need to take? We do recommend to kind of have an onboarding through a welcome page. So a welcome page, at least in our product, it's kind of like the page that I will see in the first login. So that will kind of like guide me into the key actions that I should take, like complete my user profile, join a group, introduce myself to the live feed, for example. But it's also important that when I come back, I'm still not overwhelmed by these like 10 or 12 tabs in the main navigation. Sometimes there's even like a second level of sub tabs. So our recommendation is to really keep it to 5 or 6 tabs. So you can see here how that's already kind of like visually it's less heavy, and to take the freedom to group them, to rename into what makes sense for your community, and to use the sub tabs if you need kind of like more entry points. So in here you can see, for example, the connect tab. If you hover over it, you can see the forums, the events, the groups, and the member directory. So this type of categorization, it makes it really clear, like, what do I want to do as a user? Do I want to go to the home, to the live feeds? Do I want to connect? Do I want to learn? This makes it easier for the user to understand just by reading those headlines where they should go next.
Absolutely. So great kind of key takeaways there. Keep your navigation simplified to 5 or 6 main tabs. Don't let it get kind of overwhelmed and overburdened. More is not always better when it comes to user experience design.
Exactly. And up on the next slide, there's kind of like another tip. Sometimes we understand that you need to share a bit more context, like what does actually Hivebrite Hub mean? Like I need some space to kind of like explain it. So in this type of cases, you can use what we call opener pages. So basically, when I click on the main tab, I will land in this page. If it's the first time I come to the platform, this is quite interesting to me because I can understand what each sub tab means. But for example, if I'm a user that I'm already been here like a couple times, then I can use the sub tab as a shortcut to directly go into the status updates, for example. What's important to keep in mind with the opener pages is to still keep it short. As you can see in here, the layout, it's also quite handy because everything is in the same line. So at a glance, I can see what each of these points mean. And last but not least, always include like a CTA. It can be in the form of a text link, a button, perhaps even if I click on the image, but somewhere where directly by being on this page, when I click on it, I can reach those sub tabs. You don't want to send your user back into navigating through the main navigation. You kind of want to take them by the hand and bring them into those sub pages.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's sort of the role of your team and kind of design within the community. You're literally guiding folks without being kind of there in person as they're experiencing the community on how to get to where they're looking for and sort of showing them the different features and functionality in a way that's like really palatable and approachable for them.
Exactly, and that ties great with the next tip. So sometimes we're kind of like really centered in our internal jargon, like our company specific terminology. As we try to put ourselves into end user shoes, like into flow, we also need to kind of like survey our users and make sure that they understand the way that we group things, the way that we name things, just as we do internally. This is something really important because it's kind of like being blindsided, you know, like the horses. Like when we're all working internally and only internal stakeholders are reviewing your work, for everyone in the company, it makes sense the way that you have grouped it. But if you survey your end users, so for example, there's a great user test you can use for this. It's called card sorting. Basically, imagine each card will be a topic or a subtab, and then you will ask your end users to group them into what makes sense for them. Perhaps for someone, events, it's not so much about connection, but it's more about learning. So in this way, you can kind of like double check the assumptions that you have taken, double check kind of like that internal separation that you have, and make sure that it is adapted to what your end users are actually experiencing when they navigate through the platform.
That's a great point. And it's important to kind of make sure that your end users and your community are involved within sort of how you structure and making sure, again, like you said, using the customer voice, using terminology that they're using within the community every day. Brenda, how often would you say that you recommend like surveying your users? Is it something that's sort of an ongoing thing that you can include within your community, or do you recommend like quarterly, annually? What do you think would potentially work best here?
Specifically for the main navigation or just generally?
That's a good point. Let's start with the main navigation.
Okay, yeah, I think for the main navigation, it's good to kind of run like a annual audit. So first to do it kind of like by yourself, you know, by your team. Like it does happen, a community starts growing, you add more pages. If the team starts growing, then it can also be that everyone starts kind of like adding new detailed pages and the structure that you had defined gets a bit out of control. So it's good to kind of like do that internal audit, then survey, repair any things where you feel like some hierarchy guidelines were not followed, and then survey your users. And otherwise, for any other topics, what's like really like a good practice, some of our clients, they have kind of like a give feedback tab. And this just goes like into an external type of tool, whatever it is that you're using, Google Forms, any survey tool, where at any point an end user can give them feedback about anything. So that's something that you can kind of do like the entire year. It's really nice because sometimes it's not even so much about the design, but it's about ideas or topics or content that the community members would love to see in the platform. So it's kind of like great to see what are the interests that perhaps you are not targeting. And also once they say, hey, I would really love it if there was a group about this. And if you think it makes sense and if you create it, then they really feel like they're being heard. So that kind of like ties together the community manager to the community members.
That's a great point. It's sort of like you're always able to be actively listening to your community there and like incorporating their feedback into the way that your community functions and runs.
Exactly. And that's kind of like, again, when we were talking like web design and community, it's not people that are just consuming or coming one time to buy something or to check an information, right? It's really like an organism. So you want to really make it be a conversation. Of course, some people want to do that in a more public way. Like some of our clients, they use forums and they just kind of like put it out there. Like if you have any comments, add them here. But I do think having the possibility of submitting that in a private form as well, it kind of like makes it kind of more comfortable for anyone to share things without them being like out there for the entire community to read. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's probably a little bit easier sometimes for community members to share like constructive criticism that way. That's a little bit more private. That way they can benefit the community by saying, hey, this doesn't work, or not, I'm never able to find this. And I'm constantly looking for it, or this group would be great if we could kind of include it. We feel like there's a gap today. So I think that's a really great point. It seems like there are folks in the audience who can implement this type of continuous surveying and feedback to incorporate into their community building.
Exactly. And I think the like something really important as well is there's obviously going to be perhaps one person in charge of reading all those kind of like comments. But perhaps that one person takes a lead per month or bi-monthly to kind of like summarize all those insights kind of by topic and to share them with the internal team that is running that community, just so those learnings they kind of like stay with the team and they're taking into account for future decisions. So what you just said, like, for example, if 5 users say, oh, I never find the FAQ, then why is that? Is it perhaps because it's too hidden, because you named the tab something else that is not FAQ? And then kind of like just knowing like, hey, for future reference, this terminology or this wording or nesting things, this important solo in sitemap, it's not a good practice. And then this kind of like activates that kind of like reflex to go back into your end user insights before you make decisions for the future.
That's a really great point. And let's say you've got a community who generates a ton of feedback every month, and you feel like it's a little bit overwhelming to manually sift through that and kind of elevate the insights that are sort of the most pressing. This could be a great opportunity to take all of that feedback, use AI to kind of help prioritize. Okay, how many times have people cited the navigation as a problem? How many people have kind of asked for this? Or what are the kind of top requests when it comes to the feedback system that you guys have going? So always trying to find ways to help make AI improve the daily life of community managers, marketers, et cetera. So that could be a great way to kind of sift through the feedback that you guys are getting.
Totally. Yeah. Work smarter, not harder.
Not there we go. Okay, awesome. And then I think the last of the three pain points here we have activating too many features too soon.
Yeah, so this is one that happens a lot. So this is our back office interface where basically admins can browse through all the modules that Hivebrite offers. We offer a lot of modules. It doesn't mean you have to activate them all. Sometimes, of course, it's hard. You just bought a new product. You want to use it all. But it's not really tied kind of to your strategy if you activate everything at once. So really try to think of a phased approach for this future rollout. Also to think what are the features that you really need for what purpose, and kind of like launch the core features that align with those community needs when you think of the community lifecycle. So the community lifecycle we'll see on the next slide. Basically, it's how do users join your community? Then, so I think so the activation of the users when they join. So that's basically the inception of your community. Then the next step is the establishment, where your goal is mainly retention. Then we have the maturity, where your goal is to create organic engagement. And last but not least, We have the mitosis, which is basically when the community becomes more scalable because perhaps you empower super contributors to manage part of the community. So really kind of like take a look at where you're at on your community journey and kind of think, okay, if I'm in activation, what's the most important for me? And activate the modules that you need to make that happen. Like users activate, then what's the most important thing they should see right after? In your case, is it the live feed? Is it events? Then when you move on to retention, then making sure your users find value, what does that mean in your community? For every community is different. Some communities are about sharing knowledge. So perhaps activating the media library, it's super important. Some other communities are more around discussions. So perhaps forums is the most important. I kind of like try to think through this kind of like phased approach of a community lifecycle. What are the actual features that you need and how to introduce them in that phased approach.
Yeah, this is really important. This was a really helpful slide for me to kind of understand the kind of full community life cycle, where to start, what your kind of end goal is in terms of scalability. And this ties back to the concept of like hierarchy. So if you're thinking about what your community needs at sort of each stage of their life cycle, making sure that you create that kind of prioritization, that hierarchy list based on the needs that they have at each phase. From my end, kind of on the marketing side, I think it's really common for stakeholders in any project to get super excited and want to kind of put everything on the table all at once. That way they're making sure that they're meeting everyone's needs. But as you said, Brenda, it's really important to make sure that there's a phased approach. You don't want to overwhelm people, and you want to make sure that you're kind of playing that role of guiding them along their journey rather than just throwing everything at them and expecting them to know where to go first and how to navigate.
Exactly. I think the conversation with the stakeholders, it's important to kind of like show them exactly this phased approach, right? Like we're here, then we'll go here, then we'll go here, so that they understand why are you saying no? Why don't you want to activate everything at once, right? So if you kind of like tell them, look, this is the community life cycle, this is where we're starting. Set your goals. Don't forget to measure your goals as well, because sometimes we have clients that they kind of like get stuck in one section of this life cycle. They're still putting almost all their efforts into it, even if they already actually activated, like reach an activation rate of 85% of their customer use base. So that's really high. So it doesn't mean you don't want to get the last percent of that activated, but it does mean that you should change to that second gear. And now think, how do I gain retention with the 85% that already joined, right? So it's important both for you as community manager, like the people that are managing the tool, to set those goals, to check the status on those goals, to make sure that you are putting the most time and effort in the next step, and also to have that easier conversation with the stakeholder. Why are we making these choices? Why are we not turning everything on at the same time? For them to be able to tie it into goals, into KPIs, so that you can prove the value of this phased approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so we'll kind of transition into the next phase of the webinar, where we talk a little bit more about aesthetics and like the design side of user experience design. So question we kind of get often, how do you balance aesthetics and then functionality in community design?
Yeah, so I think this one is
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's tying back into internal stakeholders, into content. It's usually a lot of people coming together to build a project like that, like an online community. It's a big thing. So it's just about keeping it, let's say, short and simple. You need to think of attention spans. You need to think in that page where you are in that section, in that journey. What is the actual main action, that you want the user to take? And I think it really helps to do this just in writing together as a team and to align on what's that basically like that objective. So instead of everyone coming kind of with like their PDF of like, oh, I want to include this and I want to include that, to kind of like really reduce it into like, okay, if we're thinking of the events page or the donations page, what's actually the most important thing that we want? We want people to donate. So is it really that important to explain them all the payment needs at the first glance? So that would be kind of like my my recommendation to sit as a team and think. It can be page by page, it can be journey by journey. Think like as the user is going through those steps, what is the key action in that step, and do you have kind of like that internal alignment? Then you can go into the design phase, like wireframing or thinking how you're gonna solutionize it. And it most often comes when we are starting to do the design that people want to add more things into it. But since you already had kind of like that structure and that internal alignment, like actually we said the most important thing is this, then you can come back to that and kind of like reduce the discussions, or if something needs to be added, you can add it to the bottom and still keep it short, let's say, like trying to keep it constrained and in the scope of what you define as the main goal.
I like that. So really kind of prioritizing one key action per section or per page of your community and really focusing on that. That way it doesn't kind of get overwhelming with, oh, I want people to do X, Y, and Z when they first land on the page, or when they get to this section, we need them to focus on these 5 things, like really simplifying it down to kind of one action that you have alignment with the team on, and doing the pre-planning before you get into the design.
Exactly. Yeah. For us, that works best when we do it in writing, just like small post-its, instead of jumping into the design, and then it gets mixed with a lot of other kind of like personal opinions on visuals and sizes and stuff like that.
And less is more always. And then, so this kind of ties into that stakeholder conversation that I think folks across community marketing deal with all the time. When you have a lot of opinions internally, when you have a lot of different stakeholders and kind of conflicting opinions, how do you manage those kind of different opinions when it comes to kind of like the community execution? Do you have any advice on folks who might be in this situation where some people want to prioritize this and there isn't kind of that alignment there?
Yeah. So I think the community life cycle is a great it's a great support in this case. Like if the team has aligned, like either we are launching or we think we're already on this step, and our goal, let's say this quarter, is this step and not the next one. It already kind of like helps to kind of like put a pin on that, come back to that, and make sure that whatever new things, features, content that are adding are actually contributing to that goal. And then in terms more kind of like of look and feel, like not so much like new features or new content. Coming back to what we said at the beginning, I think brand guidelines are great to defend your decisions when it's more about UI, colors, sizes, etc. Brand guidelines are a great way kind of to defend what you've done, because consistency is really important. It's not just important, again, to make your brand recognizable, but it's also important that within that community that there is that consistency, that users do not feel lost or what's going on with this one page. So if it's more kind of like about visual discussions, I will say kind of like that those brand guidelines or the page templates that you've already created, those are also brand guidelines, right? So if someone wants to introduce something new, of course you can, but then you have to kind of cascade it across your entire site.
That makes sense. And your brand guidelines are like your North Star. Whenever you have to make a decision, you look to that and it'll help kind of easily define what direction to go in.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now we've got another question. So what are some key insights or design takeaways that you've learned from working with so many different communities across a variety of different industries, use cases? I mean, you've got a ton of experience under your belt, Brenda.
Yeah, so actually it's very interesting because as you know, Hivebrite has like so many sectors. We serve so many clients from different sectors like NGO, commercial, alumni platforms, etc. What we can see is that generally a lot of the community builders are facing the same issues. So it's not so much like per industry, it's more what's the experience again of joining that community. So when we think about how we build product for communities, we're starting, let's say, to shift into perhaps we should not try to section by industry, but more about again putting ourselves into shoes of the end user and seeing how they join these communities. And one of the things that has kind of like struck us as quite interesting is that regardless again of industry, we do have two main type of communities. So we have what we call closed communities. So these are basically communities where you are invited because you had a similar past experience with other people. So when I say past experience, it can be something like a alumni community. So if we studied together, perhaps one day we're both going to receive an email to join like the university ex-alumni community. So those are kind of like the closed communities. And then we have the open communities. So the open communities is really communities that the user has found. So it's communities of interest, for example. When they join these communities, they are really kind of like doing the effort to find the community, to join the community. So their level of engagement, they say the level of implication at the beginning, it's way higher. However, the closed communities, let's say you didn't really ask to be invited, but what they have going on for them is that most likely there's people in that community that you already know. So those are kind of like the two different, like, let's say, division we're seeing. Again, there's industries that do both open and closed communities, but we're trying to kind of like put ourselves on the end user shoes to kind of like try to solutionize in the best way possible that community lifecycle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember when I joined the team, I met with some of kind of our community managers internally, and we were talking about our content strategy. And I had this kind of focus in terms of like, okay, we need to create different content for the different sectors and different industries that folks are in. And they said the same thing that you did, which is like community is community. And a lot of the core issues and problems are agnostic of what type of organization or industry you're in. Community managers like to learn from community managers who are across different kind of types of practices, because a lot of the core fundamentals are the same. You're looking at how to provide value. You're looking at how to kind of create a lot of those organic connections with your community. You're looking at how to kind of engage people, and those transpire across kind of whatever your different use cases are. So I always think it sort of kind of brings everybody back together and kind of creates like a level playing field. And it helps people kind of learn from tactics and techniques that other community managers are employing and having success with.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically, like their learnings, they help any other community managers. And even when you think of your community objective, like some of the tactics that work, they work thanks to the way that they engage with users. So a lot of things can be kind of like transformed to work for your use case if you're taking inspiration from a community manager that has already a thriving community.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've gone through a lot of the bread and butter in terms of a UX design community. We're wrapping up the year now, so what are some emerging trends in design that you see shaping sort of the future of online community building?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's not just community building. I think definitely there's a lot of talk around AI and automation. So this is not just for community, it's for any kind of like tech product right now. I think in terms of community, it's going to be interesting how this evolves, how this kind of starts automating some of the tasks that community managers have to take sometimes, or just kind of like help us to provide more personalized content for users. Like we have the data, right? We try community analytics, but now how can we kind of add that plus AI to create a more personalized experience for the end users? And again, as you were mentioning at the beginning, it's not always just about thinking like, how is that going to impact directly the end users, but how can also AI help you, as you were mentioning, Allie, to kind of like make your work easier, to perhaps start doing things that before you didn't do because you thought, oh, but we don't have the time. We don't have the time to kind of create that poll, and then imagine we have like 1 million users, so we're gonna get like so many requests. Who's gonna look at it? Then they're just gonna feel ignored, right? So you kind of just think, no, we don't have the time to do that. So let's kind of like not open that kind of worms. And I think in that sense, we also have to start thinking like how can we use AI to kind of like fill those gaps of things that before we thought we don't have time to do that, but now you do. If you survey users, even if you get like 500 answers, as you were saying, if you used AI to summarize it, then you can get a pretty good summary, a pretty good understanding of where the pain points are. And I think that's pretty exciting, like pretty exciting to see kind of like, let's say it's like another little you working alongside you. So kind of like what work can you put that automated thing do for you that can improve the quality of your community?
Yeah. I think AI is such a hot topic now. People are talking about it across, every different industry, every different kind of job role. And I think we're getting past the kind of fear of AI a little bit. In terms of AI first came out, there was a lot of concern around, is this going to displace jobs? Is it going to affect the quality? Is it going to kind of take the human element out of a lot of these different things, from content writing to community engagement? But I think what you said is really important, and it's sort of what I'm seeing across the marketing side of things too, which is using AI as an assistant and as a tool, and not to displace, from my end, content writers, unique ideas. And from a community management perspective, you don't want to use AI to kind of replace the human element and component in your community. You want to make sure that you have people actively listening, engaging with your members. You don't want to just kind of automate things to such a degree that you take away that kind of real kind of connection, which is the main reason that people come and join communities, across all of the different use cases that we see. But that being said, if you embrace AI and begin to kind of use it in ways that help you be more efficient, take the burden off of a lot of those like really tedious manual tasks, like data and reporting, like pulling insights from large data sets, like analyzing a lot of like the content in your community. What are the topics that people are talking most about? Then you can kind of almost become more efficient. And one of the other trends I think we see in community management a lot is that people are strapped for resources. They don't have enough people on their team, like you were saying, Brenda. They don't have enough time. So if you look at it in ways of kind of unlocking a little bit more time to focus on the bigger, more important, more strategic elements, and take kind of the menial small tasks that, data analysis could have taken you 2 hours before. And now if you kind of figure out prompts and use AI, and you can condense that down to 15, 20 minutes, you freed up a significant amount of time in your work week to again prioritize some of those bigger strategic initiatives for your community.
Totally. And I think sometimes it's also just like, let's say like another tool that you can use to ping pong ideas, it doesn't mean you're gonna do what it tells you, but you can ask it if you're having a challenge today, like, hey, I think we can go back to the navigation example. I think my navigation is really overloaded. You can list it all the tabs and request it, like, how will you organize this to have a maximum of 4 tabs? And it's pretty interesting. Like, I mean, these models have been fed so much data, so it's not just pulling out like a random answer. It is based on tons and tons of data. So again, it's not like you have to ask it everything and do everything it's telling you, but I do think sometimes it gives kind of like a fresh perspective of something that you haven't thought about before.
Absolutely. And it presents data in such a different way than just like a Google search. It kind of really distills and saves you time from like wading through a bunch of different articles and opinions, and kind of distills things really quickly. So, like you said, you don't have to take everything that it says and kind of execute and implement it. It's your job to kind of cherry pick and determine what is going to work for you and your community.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say something that's also very handy for us when we work with design services, is to kind of like use it in partner with our clients to try to shorten the text. So sometimes this briefing to
Oh, yeah.
create pages, they're done in a PDF. So by the time we get the PDF, then we have to put it on a nice layout visually. It's gonna be such a huge page. So it's hard to shorten text that you've written yourself. You kind of feel like every
Mhm.
word is important, right? So just asking, can you make this shorter? Can you make it a bit shorter? And then you can edit it if there's one specific word you did want it to use, but it does make that type of work like super fast.
You're right, and I actually use that on the content side of things all the time. Summarize this into 2 sentences, or I need it to fit this particular box, or even a good use case could be within the navigation. Sometimes you have an element that you want to use, but it's like 2 words, and you want it to be consistent with your other navigation elements. So, like, what are other common phrases for this? How can I rephrase this into 1 word? So it's a good point, and that it's a big time saver because you're not just sitting there trying to kind of brainstorm, or like you said, if you're precious about the content that you've written, it really helps you kind of take yourself out of it and summarize in like a really effective way.
Yeah. I mean, in the past, you're brainstorming or you're kind of looking at another 20 websites, see what did they named it, if it fits with your structure. So that is like just kind of like think what are kind of like small tasks. It could be small task. Maybe it just take you 30 minutes, but if now you can do it in 2 minutes, it frees up more time for you to do the important things that AI cannot do today. Yeah.
Absolutely. And now we've got about 15 minutes left on the clock. We are going to take some time for a Q&A now and jump to some questions from our audience. So let's see what we've got here. Any tips, Brenda, on mobile design, which I know kind of probably aligns to a lot of the other recommendations you gave, but sometimes can be its own beast?
Yeah, I think mobile design is even more important to to keep it short, to keep it focused. So we are talking about like reduced space, right? So there's more there's less, sorry, there's less space to put the key actions forward. So really think about putting the most important thing at the top. Something else that's quite important is to work on the sizes. So if a headline is, I don't know, 48 pixels on desktop, you don't want it to be 48 pixels on mobile because it's gonna look huge. So think of that responsiveness. And I will say the other thing, if we are talking also about the mobile app, is also to think about the mobile app notifications. So having an online community that relies as well on a mobile app, it's great because as soon as you get again the activation and you get end users that already downloaded that app, then you are basically in their pocket, right? So you also need to be careful. Mobile push notifications are really powerful, but think of how as a team again you can align on the level of updates or of new content that will require a mobile push notification, what shouldn't, so that you make sure that you nudge your users to come back to your platform, but not to the level that they're gonna feel it's a bit too much, and then they're gonna basically turn off all notifications.
Yeah, there's a delicate balance there. I can tell you
Exactly.
with how many notifications I've turned off on my phone. Okay, awesome. This one ties into some of kind of our design conversation. So, how do you stay on top of design best practices? Are there any? I know podcasts are huge nowadays. Any podcasts, blogs, anything that you could maybe share with the team that you find really inspirational?
I mean, I think for like UI trends, Dribble, it's an old one, but
Mm,
it's still pretty good. Otherwise, I really like the awards page as well, like AWWW. But it's just like for really like nice inspirations. For things that are a bit more kind of editorial or stuff like that, there's a website called It's Nice That. So this one is a bit more putting together a culture and also design theory and stuff like that. Otherwise, it's great to kind of like join conferences, like design conferences or webinars like this. Figma, for example, they have like a really nice conference. It's every year in London, I believe. And sometimes a lot of these conferences, if you go in person, you need to pay a price for the ticket. But if you just want to watch it online, it's for free. So or it's like a really low price, but because basically they just stream everything. And
that's great.
otherwise, I think what's also important is that you foster that exchange of ideas within your teams. So we have inspiration channels or kind of like watch trends channels for almost every subject at Hivebrite internally, like tech trends, AI trends, design trends. So I think kind of like launching these internal Slack channels where everyone can just kind of drop like links like, hey, check this out, look at this new release. It can also be things that you don't like, or you can start kind of like a discussion, like, what do you think of the new redesign of Slack? That one was kind of a big one in the community, but kind of like foster that internal culture as well, because it kind of like magnifies what you're gonna be able to see, right? Like if you just try to keep up to date with the trends by yourself, you're only gonna see things that you will usually look at. But if you create that culture within your team, then you can see that the inspiration can come from so many sources.
And that's a great point on creating those Slack channels, because then you sort of have a history. So when you're going off to do a particular project, you can kind of go into that bank and look at all the different recommendations and even the files that you've shared, rather than having them in one-off emails or Slack messages. It's all sort of contained in one place. That's a great idea. Next question we have here: what other data do you use to inform design decisions?
So we are using a tool that's called Lisna. So Lisna basically helps us to do user testing. So this can be moderated or unmoderated. It really is a great tool. It does anything from like card sorting in case we want to define like hierarchy or categorization. We also use it to test the new redesigns. So we create basically clickable prototypes through Figma. We A/B test a design against another one. So that's like a great tool for that. Otherwise, we do run a lot of client interviews. So trying to understand also with community managers what are kind of like the pain points around specific subject. It really depends on what we're working on our roadmap. We do this discovery project. Into discovery project, basically we work in a double diamond process. That's kind of like the term for it. So basically, it really means that in the first step, you are just gathering data. So you are gathering data also of the usage of the platform, like how many people use this feature, for what are they using it, how many people stay on this page or click on this button or make it at the end of the funnel. So that's kind of like the internal data of your product. Then you collect what we call external data. So looking into benchmark, competitor analysis, and then finally talking to the clients to get kind of like that more like hands-on particular data to a use case before we can take the project into the next phase, which is basically with all this data, how do we think we can improve this specific part of the product?
Very, very thorough. I think a lot of people got a lot of use out of that. And thanks, Kat, for linking Listna there. It seems like people are really interested in checking that out. So appreciate that. Super helpful feedback, Brenda. And last question we have here before we wrap up. Do you have any tips on using gamification in community design? That seems to be a pretty hot topic in community, how to kind of use gamification to engage your users, get them excited. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think gamification is a great tool to keep users engaged. I would say the tips are to explain the rules of the game to the people. Like a lot of our clients, they kind of introduce the feature, let's say, by themselves. Like basically, when you join, you get a new joiner badge. So I thought that was like a pretty smart way of introducing kind of like the concept, like, hey, there's badges and gamification. But after they get that badge, then kind of like link them out into a page where you really explain how many badges are they, what do I have to do to get them. Again, think of activating email notifications or push notifications whenever a user gets a badge, or perhaps to nudge them to take the action, the last action needed for them to get the next level badge, right? So really kind of like following up with their progress. And I think the other thing is again the alignment internally, right? Like when you create the rules of the game, it's important that you're all aligned and that you don't start changing them in the middle of the game, because it can be frustrating to the user. So really think, what is it that you want to reward people with? And there's obviously other ways of rewarding users than just assigning badges. So think also if you kind of want to highlight top contributors, if you kind of want to create a channel for the kind of like most involved users, and try to create that path from making them feel seen, making them feel valued, to perhaps even one day making them part of running a small part of your community, right? Like perhaps
Right.
then they get the membership at 50% off or for free. But again, you tell them, well, now you're gonna be, let's say, like a super user of this community, so you get the membership for free. But what we are expecting from you is to help us welcome new joiners when you can, to host a webinar or to run a group. So there's different ways that people will respond to kind of like those gamification strategies.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's really good guidance to make it enjoyable, but also super comprehensive for the end user when they're kind of engaging with like a new gamification tactic in a community. Fun. Well, thank you, Brenda, for joining us, and thank you everyone for logging in today. That concludes our Design and UX webinar. We are to our audience, we're going to be sharing the recording of this webinar via email, so take a look out for that. And then if you have any follow-up questions that you think of, feel free to hit reply on that email. Let us know. One of us will reach out to you and incorporate that feedback for the next time. And a survey link has been dropped in the chat. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to give us your feedback on today's webinar so we can help improve future ones. Thanks again to everybody, and we will see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.